Welcome back to the ECB Cyberbar podcast. Today we are talking about governance, risk and compliance from a European perspective. Let me break down the jargon a little bit for you. GRC stands for Governance, Risk and Compliance. In cybersecurity, think of it as the ultimate business playbook. Governance is about who is in charge and who makes the rules. It sets the strategy from the top. Risk is figuring out what could go wrong, like a data breach, a hack, or a system crash, and planning how to stop it. Compliance is making sure you follow actual laws and industry rules so you don't get sued or fined. In Europe, this playbook is changing fast, and compliance failure now poses massive financial and legal risks to businesses. Joining us from the Netherlands to break this down is cybersecurity researcher Stefan. Welcome to the podcast, and please just introduce yourself before we get started.
Thank you, Gamu. I'm glad to be here. I'm Stefan. I have experience as cybersecurity officer, GRC, and currently I'm a cybersecurity researcher. The view from the Netherlands right now is intense, like the landscape is intense with all the new European law rules and updates.
Yeah, all right. Thank you so much for the introduction. So we're going to get straight into the topic. So what we're seeing is that a lot of companies are used to just one standard US blueprint for their security. Could you shed light on why that doesn't work in Europe anymore?
Essentially global politics is fracturing at the moment, so we have different rules in Europe, US and Asia, and they're drifting apart. So the European norms are different, so that's why instead of a one-size-fits-all solution, we in Europe decided to have our own rules and guidelines and guardrails.
Okay. And speaking of rules, lately we've seen two new tech rules, specifically the DORA and the EU AI Act. And we could see that these are shaking up the continent. So DORA stands for Digital Operational Resilience Act. And could you tell us more about who it affects and what it actually means? What is it all about?
Yeah, so it affects financial entities, including banks and insurance companies. Basically, but not only them, also their suppliers directly or indirectly is contracts. The vision shifts from can we prevent a hack to when a hack happens, can we actually keep running, solve the problem and get back up and running so that the economy doesn't crash. So the companies also are forced to check their suppliers because they play an important role and can have an impact on the operations. So right now it's not only that the suppliers are responsible, the responsibility also shifts to the companies who buy from these suppliers.
Yeah, okay. Thank you for that. And the second giant that we're seeing is the EU AI Act. This is a massive deal for anyone using artificial intelligence. What is the reality there?
Yeah, so the AI Act ranks basically AI on how dangerous it can be. Let's say, for example, in the hiring system, there also needs to be a human in the loop, so human oversight in the use of clean data while training, because of course there can be discrimination in such a process, and that basically needs to be prevented. And it's not only those rules that exist, but also there are fines connected to them, which can be up to 7% of the global annual revenue, which is a large amount.
Okay, that's a large amount, and I can imagine how much that could ruin a business. And that brings us straight to the boardroom. Could you tell us a bit more about corporate governance in this case?
Exactly. So corporate governance is now a mission control problem. Company boards can no longer push it down to the IT department, just offload it there and then forget about it. They actually have to have a hands-on approach because it has such a large impact on the company. Yeah,
100%. Yeah. And just out of your experience, how best could corporate start, creating that culture of involving the board members and getting them to really understand? Because the problem that we're facing right now is that most of these board members see cybersecurity as too expensive. They see it as an expense. It's not really prioritized. So what do you suggest could be a way forward regarding that?
It's indeed seen as a cost mostly without any immediate revenue. But one has to look actually at the risks and how they could materialize, so the impact of it. And if you express it into monetary, like loss or loss of reputation, if you look at it like that, you will see that it can have a large impact. So that's when it becomes more important to have controls in place, and that's when actually the board can see this is important and it's not just a chore.
Yeah, okay, thank you for that. So moving on to segment 2, we're going to talk about ditching spreadsheets for automation. Now, old school spreadsheets or that system simply cannot keep up with these fast-moving laws like the EU AI Act or DORA. How do companies actually handle this without drowning in paperwork?
So the most important thing is to automate out all the boring stuff. So to have continuous monitoring of your systems, and that way you can create KPIs, key performance indicators, which show you how the systems are doing. But this also improves the compliance checks. The previously tedious and large compliance checks run a lot smoother now if you have all these systems in place. Which track software 24/7 in real time.
Okay, and also could you tell us or explain policy as code?
Yeah, so policy as code is another helpful tool essentially, where you write security and compliance requirements into machine readable rules. So let's take an example for code in a cloud infrastructure. Where the rules are verified. If you create like an unencrypted bucket or a public bucket, then the policy basically decides let's stop this right here.
Yeah.
So that's basically guardrails what the developer does, and that helps organizations enforce technical compliance consistently and much earlier in the development process as opposed to a hindsight.
Okay, that's great because it means that you're stopping the mistake before it ever leaves the building and catching it early rather than months later during an audit. Because one thing corporates don't like is audit.
Exactly.
When someone is marking your homework and it's just a mess. So yeah. Okay, so moving on to segment 3, we want to bring that European perspective to Zimbabwe and see some of the things that we can learn from these new rules, from these new policies. And Europe is famous for setting the gold standard for regulations, which is the Brussels effect. And what can developing digital economies, specifically a country like Zimbabwe, learn from this European approach to GRC?
Yeah, so Zimbabwe already has an incredible foundation to build on. For example, the Cybersecurity and Data Protection Act is already heavily inspired by the GDPR from Europe. And the big lesson right now is essentially the 10%, the passing of the law is the first 10% of the battle. The next large sum is essentially getting that culture of risk management and governance through in companies. That's like the next big step.
Okay, right, because having a law on paper doesn't matter if companies just treat it like a background chore, like you said earlier on. And how do we move past that? How do we move from that paper, you can just say you have a paper, but you're not actually practicing what's on the paper? How do we move past that?
Yeah, so it needs to be a board level priority. So from the top down, essentially, and not just an IT task. Essentially, Zimbabwean businesses need to, and state organizations as well, need to integrate cyber risks directly into their boardroom strategies. If the leadership already doesn't view data breach as a core business risk, then there's no further moving there. So it needs to be viewed as core business risk. The impact needs to be visible, as what I earlier said in terms of monetary impact or image. And otherwise, yeah, what you said, otherwise it's a hollow paperwork exercise, if that's not the case.
Yeah, and I think a lot of corporates tend to wake up when they see the numbers, how big the numbers are in terms of the damages. That's when they start to, run around. So it's really important, like what you said, for us to have that monetary view, to really see the value of, governance, risk and compliance solutions. So the problem is that we're still a developing country, and we have Europe, which is a bigger economy, thriving more, and most of the times the excuse that comes up is we don't have the budget for this. We don't have the budget for this new continuous monitoring tool, or this risk and compliance solution, things like that. So how could Zimbabwean organizations implement this practically without the massive budget that maybe European tech giants have?
Yeah, so to align with the risk and compliance, you don't actually need a multi-million-dollar software to start. It's much more simpler. Zimbabwean business should actually adopt the European habit of doing mandatory risk assessments upon every type of business process, for any new technology as well that they buy. So you start at the core, you look at, you understand exactly where citizen and customer data is stored, the associated risks, who has access to the data, and you enforce strict and clear internal rules surrounding accountability.
Definitely.
When something happens.
Yeah, definitely. Building a solid structural framework first, rather than just buying expensive security tools, because in as much as we, let's say, buy the tools, if we're not really practicing using them well, and like what you said, doing the risk assessments, the risk register and all of that, then it becomes less effective. So could you tell us about good governance, as we're winding up?
Yeah, so as I mentioned earlier, it isn't expensive because good governance is essentially free. It's about clear processes, rules, and accountability. And Zimbabwe can champion this proactively with a GRC mindset.
Yeah.
It will make local business also much more highly attractive for international investors who demand this stricter data protection.
Yeah, thank you so much. So, framing security as a badge of honor to build trust and unlock global trade, to sum up what you said. Thank you so much for joining us. Do you have any last words for the audience? Yep. Any tips? Yeah, anything you'd like to say before we end the episode?
Yeah, so even though these European legislations and laws might seem far away, there's much to learn from them. Or even due to supply chain, might actually become a topic in Zimbabwe, but especially important for global and international business.
Okay. All right. Thank you for your valuable insights, and thank you to our audience for tuning in. Stay tuned for the next episode. Stay secure and stay resilient. We will see you next time.